Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Quick Buzz Big. Your support is the biggest motivation for us to keep bringing you new videos every single day. Thanks for watching. Welcome to the story. My roommate was an extreme radical feminist. Every single day, she had the same phrase on repeat. What's the point of disgusting men like you taking up space on this planet? Beautiful, amazing women are the only ones worth loving. One day, a kind campus security officer brought me some homemade sausages from his hometown. She immediately shoved him aside and started yelling, "You disgusting old creep. You're just using this as an excuse to hit on young girls, aren't you? Why don't you just die already?" Then came Valentine's Day. My boyfriend and I exchanged gifts. The moment I turned my back, she threw my gift straight into the trash. When I confronted her, she actually acted like she was teaching me a life lesson. "Emma, you need to learn how to be independent. How can you let a man support you all the time?" And yet, in the end, she was the one who climbed into our faculty advisor's bed and became his favorite student. Using that special treatment, she sabotaged my graduation and destroyed years of research I had worked so hard to complete. Furious, I went to confront her. But before I could get any answers, a flower pot came crashing down from above, thrown by her. Struck me directly on the head. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back on the exact day the security officer had brought those homemade sausages for me. My head still throbbed with pain. As I looked up, I saw a familiar middle-aged man walking toward me. In his hands were 2 large bags of smoked sausages. What was going on? Hadn't Chloe Bennett thrown that flower pot and killed me outside the dormitory? How was I standing at the university entrance again? The security officer smiled warmly. "These are homemade sausages from my hometown," he said. "They're delicious. I already cooked and sliced them for you. Go ahead and give them a try." After hearing the campus security officer finish speaking, I finally came fully to my senses. I had gone back in time, back to the beginning of my first year in graduate school at Westbridge University. When I was an undergraduate, I had tutored the security officer's daughter in math. Because of that, he had always remembered my kindness. Whenever he returned from his hometown after summer or winter break, he would bring me some local specialties. Just as I was about to thank him, Chloe Bennett suddenly rushed over and slammed into me. She snatched the bag of smoked sausages from the officer's hands and threw it straight onto the ground. Lifting her chin arrogantly, she pointed at him and sneered. "Old man, at your age, you'd think you'd have some dignity left. Don't tell me you're using this as an excuse to flirt with young women? Keep dreaming. Men like you are absolutely disgusting. Why don't you just die already? If I were you, I'd be too ashamed to keep living." The string of insults left the security officer completely stunned. Students nearby immediately turned to look. Since no one knew what had actually happened, they could only piece together the situation from Chloe's accusations. Everything was exactly the same as in my previous life. The security officer was an honest, simple man. He wasn't good with words. After being verbally attacked by Chloe, his face turned bright red with anger. Yet he couldn't find the right words to defend himself. In the end, Chloe and several bystanders recorded videos, posted them online, and began condemning him everywhere. As the story spread, it became more and more distorted. Eventually, the truth disappeared altogether. What remained was a rumor that a creepy old campus security guard had been harassing female college students. Because of the accusations, the security officer was eventually fired by the university. When his wife heard what had happened, she went to confront Chloe Bennett and demand an explanation. But the shock and anger were too much for her. She suffered a stroke on the spot and passed away. When their daughter learned the truth, she was so devastated that she couldn't focus on her college entrance exams. In the end, she deferred her studies. Because of a single false accusation from Chloe, an entire family was destroyed. And in this life, things were unfolding exactly the same way. After hearing Chloe's accusations, the security officer hurriedly tried to explain himself, stammering nervously. I didn't mean anything like that." Chloe immediately raised her voice. Typical old men. Always making excuses. She turned to the crowd around us. "Ladies, take a good look at this. Do you really think it's safe to have a creep like this working security on our campus? She pulled out her phone and began filming him non-stop. At the same time, she encouraged everyone nearby to join her attack. As more and more students started buying into her narrative, I finally stepped forward. He was just bringing me some food from his hometown. What nonsense are you talking about? Are you seriously this paranoid? Chloe froze. She stared at me in disbelief before shouting, Emma Carter, what is wrong with you? Why are you defending some old man? Are you really that obsessed with men? All men are disgusting. What do you gain from sucking up to him? You're exactly the kind of woman whose entire brain revolves around dating. The moment you see a man, your eyes light up. As for me, I wish all these filthy men would just disappear. My mother had taught me one lesson when I was young. Once you've reached your limit, you don't have to keep tolerating nonsense. Looking at Chloe's crazed expression, I grabbed a fistful of her hair without hesitation. Amid her piercing scream, I slapped her twice across the face. Smack! Smack! What exactly do you mean by being obsessed with men? I'm just a normal person. But in the eyes of extremists like you, that somehow makes me man crazy? What did this security officer even do? On what basis are you accusing him of harassment? What if your lies spread and he loses his job? Have you even thought about that? For every question, I delivered another slap. By the time I finished, Chloe was completely dazed. She could barely stay on her feet. She fell to the ground, struggled back up, and tried to hit me. I simply stepped aside. She lost her balance and crashed face-first onto the pavement. The sight was utterly pathetic. The security officer immediately stepped in front of me. He was afraid she might try to attack me again. Trembling with rage, Chloe pointed at us and screamed, "You really are obsessed with men. Look at you two, already flirting with each other. You'll even go after an old man? You must be unbelievably desperate." At that point, the students gathered around finally realized the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. After exchanging a few comments, they gradually dispersed. I rolled my eyes, not bothering to pay any attention to Chloe Bennett, who looked completely disheveled. The security officer bent down and picked up the bag of smoked sausages from the ground. He hesitated, not daring to hand it back to me. He was afraid it had gotten dirty, but I smiled, took it from him, and thanked him. It's wrapped in plastic. The food inside is still perfectly clean. Thankfully, this time I had chosen to step in and help him. I hadn't allowed things to spiral beyond repair like they had in my previous life. I hadn't allowed his entire family to be dragged into tragedy. Thankfully, it wasn't too late. After the security officer left, Chloe's cheeks were still bright red from my slaps. She stared at me with dark, venomous eyes. "You're so considerate to that old man. Yet you're cold to your own female roommate. Living with people like you, whose brains are obsessed with romance, is seriously disgusting." I almost laughed from sheer irritation. Looking at her mockingly, I replied, "Stop turning everything into men versus women. Maybe you should first figure out whether you even deserve to be called a decent human being." After graduate school officially started, we quickly joined our faculty advisor's research lab. Not long afterward, a senior PhD student came storming over, furious. "Why did you change the equipment settings without permission? Didn't anyone tell you not to touch laboratory equipment unless you've been trained?" Seeing how devastated she looked, I immediately remembered the incident. Right. This was the very first stupid thing Chloe did after joining the program. She had sneaked into the lab ahead of everyone else and started playing with the equipment out of curiosity. In the process, she completely altered all the machine settings. The senior student had no idea. When she returned, she simply continued the final stage of her experiment. As a result, because the settings were wrong, months of work were destroyed. "I was just curious about the new equipment," Chloe said defensively. "How was I supposed to know you were running an experiment?" Then she added, "And honestly, you can't target me just because I'm a woman." There it was again. The same absurd logic. Even the senior student seemed stunned by how shameless she was. She was trembling with anger. Yet Chloe still looked completely justified, showing no intention of apologizing. Without thinking, I grabbed a bottle of laboratory dye from the nearby bench and splashed it across her face. "Ah!" Chloe let out a horrified scream. I smiled. "Sorry. I was just curious. Don't worry. It's not toxic." It'll only leave a red stain on your face for a while. No big deal. It'll fade in about a week. Chloe immediately pulled out a mirror. The moment she saw the bright red stain spreading across her face, she completely lost control. She snatched another test tube from the bench and hurled it at me. Fortunately, the senior student reacted quickly and pulled me out of the way. The test tube flew straight past us and directly into our faculty advisor, Professor Michael Anderson, who had just walked through the lab door. Luckily, only a few drops landed on him, but the reagent was highly corrosive. The instant it touched his skin, it began to hiss and sizzle. The sound alone was enough to make everyone in the room shudder. Chloe Bennett immediately froze. "Professor, I didn't mean to." She instantly put on a pitiful, helpless expression. The anger on Professor Michael Anderson's face quickly faded when he saw her acting so vulnerable, especially after his eyes drifted to her lab coat. The standard oversized lab coat had clearly been altered to fit tightly around her figure. In that moment, I understood exactly what was hidden beneath his respectable facade. It seemed he had already set his sights on Chloe. The professor suppressed the irritation he'd shown moments earlier. He didn't let the monster inside him show. Instead, he gently reached out, brushing his hand against Chloe's cheek before lightly pinching it. The sight made me want to throw up. "Honestly," he said with a smile, "even a new student can't be this clueless, can she? How do you manage to splash reagents onto your own face? You're lucky this one isn't toxic. If it had been the same chemical that landed on my hand just now, you might not have walked away from it." Chloe's eyes immediately turned red. She looked deeply wronged. "Professor, I'd like to report dash." Before she could accuse me of splashing the reagent on her, the senior PhD student quickly interrupted. "Professor, there are a few things in my experiment that I still don't understand. Could you come take a look?" Although he looked slightly annoyed, he couldn't refuse in front of everyone. He walked toward the senior student, leaving Chloe standing there with an expression full of resentment. I let out a small laugh and returned to helping another senior student with her experiment. As I turned away, I heard Chloe muttering under her breath, "Man crazy. You're all man crazy." When I reached the entrance of the student dining hall, I unexpectedly spotted Ryan Walker. A girl was standing beside him. As if sensing someone's gaze, he instinctively glanced around, but I quickly looked away. If Chloe Bennett had ever done one good thing in her life, it was helping me see a man's true colors. Ryan Walker, my boyfriend, or rather my soon-to-be ex-boyfriend. In my previous life on Valentine's Day, Chloe had thrown away the gifts Ryan and I exchanged. According to her, women needed to be independent and shouldn't rely on men. She tossed everything into the trash without a second thought. I spent 2 hours searching through garbage bins. I never found the gift. While I was crying and preparing to tell Ryan what had happened, the university's confessions page suddenly exploded online. Without even asking me what had happened, Ryan posted a photo of his gift sitting inside a trash can. He wrote a long post describing how much effort he had put into preparing it. He publicly revealed my name and department. Within hours, the comments piled up into the thousands. The entire university community was talking about it. At the time, I thought he was simply heartbroken. I called him over and over again. Every call was rejected. I waited outside his residence hall. He deliberately avoided me. Meanwhile, everyone around him treated me like the villain. They mocked me, ridiculed me. Some even told me to stop making up ridiculous excuses about my roommate throwing away the gift. It wasn't until Ryan showed up with a new girlfriend almost immediately afterward that I finally understood. It wasn't that he was heartbroken, and it wasn't that he didn't want to hear my explanation. The truth was that he had already been cheating on me. He was simply looking for a convenient excuse to break up. At the same time, he got to paint himself as the devoted boyfriend who had been hurt by his ex-girlfriend. The thought alone made me sick. And the girl standing beside Ryan Walker right now? She was the very same woman he started dating immediately after dumping me in my previous life. Wonderful. I had been far too polite to him. Just as Ryan was still looking around, trying to find whoever had been watching him, I stepped out from behind him and slapped him hard across the face. Smack. Who is this woman? What is this, Ryan? You're cheating right here on campus now? The unexpected slap left him completely stunned. He stared at me in disbelief. I immediately slapped his other cheek. Smack. Perfect symmetry. One handprint on each side of his face. This slap carried all the resentment I had buried in my previous life. Because of Ryan, my entire graduate school experience had been consumed by rumors, accusations, and misunderstandings. The worst part was that I hadn't even been given a chance to defend myself. Emma, have you lost your mind? She's just my foster sister. Ryan finally snapped out of his shock. He quickly shot a meaningful look at the girl beside him and raised his voice. I was already preparing myself for the ridiculous, "she's like a sister to me" performance. But to my surprise, the girl exploded before I could say anything. Smack. Smack. She slapped Ryan twice in rapid succession. The marks on his face instantly turned an even deeper shade of red. Who the hell is your sister? Ryan Walker, do you have no shame? You were texting me 5 minutes ago saying you'd explain everything later. Did you really think I'd believe that garbage? Do you think I'm too stupid to understand what's happening here? I gave the girl an approving glance. Then I looked back at Ryan's horrified expression. My gaze slowly drifted downward, and without the slightest hesitation, kicked him. Hard. A scream immediately echoed through the dining hall. Aya! Ryan doubled over and collapsed to the floor, clutching himself in agony. Emma Carter, what are you doing? At that moment, Chloe Bennett's voice suddenly rang out. Everyone turned toward her. The bright red stain covering half of her face was impossible to miss. Snickers and muffled laughter immediately spread throughout the cafeteria. Trying to ignore the embarrassment, Chloe pointed at me and shouted, "Men are awful. But that doesn't give you the right to destroy their dignity like this. You're a radical feminist." For a moment I nearly burst out laughing. I stared at her in disbelief, then pointed at myself. Me? I'm the radical feminist? Isn't that supposed to be your specialty? You're the one who lectures everyone about feminism all day long. So now you're flexible enough to switch sides whenever it's convenient? Chloe Bennett rushed forward to help Ryan Walker to his feet. The look on her face was full of concern and distress. Then I suddenly remembered. Of course, she had always liked Ryan. That was why she had been jealous of me and thrown away the gift he gave me. Whenever Ryan was around, she loved using lines like, "I'm an independent woman. I'm not like shallow girls who rely on men." She used those speeches to make herself seem superior and attract attention. How pathetic. I looked at the two of them and let out a cold laugh. His dignity? A guy who can't even measure up as a man is worried about dignity? The words hit both of them like a bolt of lightning. It was the first time Ryan had ever had his weakness exposed in public. His face turned bright red with humiliation. Meanwhile, Chloe nearly screamed herself hoarse. Emma Carter, what are you even saying? How can you say something so disgusting? What happened to a woman's sense of decency? Women are supposed to be pure and independent. It's bad enough that you spend Ryan's money. Now you're using words like that to humiliate him. Do you have no shame at all? I was genuinely speechless. Could somebody please explain what Chloe was even talking about? She had been like this in my previous life too. One moment she acted like an extreme progressive activist. The next moment she sounded like a conservative preacher from another century. Besides, even if a man really does have problems in that area, you shouldn't look down on him like that. As she said this, she turned toward Ryan with a gentle expression, clearly expecting some kind of emotional response. In Chloe's mind, she probably looked compassionate and understanding, the kind of woman willing to accept a man despite his shortcomings. But to Ryan it was a devastating humiliation, especially since half of Chloe's face was still covered in a blotchy red stain. She looked ridiculous. Ryan was shaking with rage. The moment she finished speaking, he threw a punch straight at her face. The blow was so hard that it knocked her to the floor. Who the hell says I can't? He glared at Chloe, then looked around at the students surrounding them. Laughter. Whispers. The sound of phones taking pictures. It came from every direction. Ryan felt as if he were being swallowed by a giant whirlpool. 1 second. 2 seconds. Then he turned and ran out of the dining hall, leaving Chloe sprawled on the floor. I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. Then I walked over and looked down at her. Let me make one thing clear. Throughout my relationship with Ryan, everything was mutual. If he bought me a gift, I bought one for him too. Whenever I bought something, I always thought about getting him something as well. So stop judging me through the lens of your own twisted worldview. I had swallowed that frustration for an entire lifetime, because the photo that ended up online was the gift Ryan had supposedly found in the trash. Everyone naturally assumed that Ryan was the only one who had ever given gifts in the relationship, while I had never given him anything in return. Later, Chloe even commented under the post, claiming to be my roommate and confirming that I was the kind of girl who only knew how to receive and never give back. I was criticized so badly that I could barely hold my head up. But this time I finally had the chance to set the record straight. Wow, Emma. You've only been here a few weeks and you're already campus famous. A senior student looked up from her phone as soon as I walked into the lab. Famous for what? Curious, I walked over. It turned out she was reading a post about the cafeteria incident earlier that day. The post had already been shared tens of thousands of times. It had spread far beyond our university. Several gossip pages had even copied and reposted it. And somehow I had earned myself a title. The Queen. Everyone was saying that the 2 slaps and the kick I delivered had been absolutely legendary. People like Ryan deserved to lose the use of their lower half permanently. Thinking back to how hard I had kicked him, I had to admit there was a decent chance I'd actually done some lasting damage. The thought instantly put me in a better mood. At least he wouldn't be fooling any more girls anytime soon. Besides the discussions about me, Ryan and Chloe were also trending topics. At that point, the entire university knew about Ryan's little problem. Hey Emma. The girl who messed with my equipment is dragging you online again. She's trying to turn public opinion against you. I found it both ridiculous and amusing. Things had already gotten this far. What else could Chloe possibly make up? So I opened the post. As expected, it was full of selective editing and outright lies. My roommate is obsessed with men. You can look up what happened at the beginning of the semester. She defended a man, then isolated and verbally attacked me. She even did that to me in the lab because she was afraid I'd be prettier than her. Don't pay attention to the red marks on my face. They're all the result of her jealousy toward other women. She and those senior girls are all male-centered pick-me girls. And using words like that to attack a man is honestly disgusting. A man's dignity is tied to things like that. Yet she publicly humiliated him in front of everyone. I think that's completely unacceptable. The things she said were so vulgar I can't even repeat them. Women should preserve their purity and self-respect. Don't let your values become corrupted. At the end of the post, she had even included her WeChat account. After reading the entire rambling mess, I felt nothing but confusion. Fortunately, the comments section was full of people tearing her apart. This poster is hilarious. All that nonsense is just another way of controlling women. She even posted her WeChat. She really thinks her opinions are unique and superior, doesn't she? Anyone interested can go at her, I guess. Just one kick from Emma was enough for me to know she isn't obsessed with men or jealous of other women. Exactly. Every word she says is just her trying to prove how morally superior and special she is. She's seriously unbearable. Not long afterward, Chloe walked into the lab alone, looking absolutely furious. The moment she saw me, she deliberately slammed into my shoulder, nearly causing me to spill the reagent I was carrying. I wasn't about to let it slide. I immediately stomped hard on her foot. Ignoring her shrill scream of pain, I turned around and walked away. A while later, while everyone was working, Chloe suddenly announced in a loud voice, "Professor Miller assigned me a paper for a top-tier scientific journal. Everyone, stop what you're doing and help me out for a bit." I looked up and gave her a meaningful glance. It had only been a few days, and she'd already climbed her way into the professor's good graces. In my previous life, Chloe had dumped the entire workload on me while she sat back, added her name to the paper and took all the credit. This time she probably knew I wouldn't help her anymore, so she decided to recruit the entire lab instead. I nearly laughed. She really had no idea what she was doing. Back when we first started graduate school, I genuinely considered her a friend and willingly helped her. But now, in her eagerness to show off the professor's favoritism, she had announced it in front of everyone. Everyone knew she was a first-year graduate student. Yet somehow she had already been given the opportunity to publish in a prestigious journal because of the professor's special treatment. Meanwhile, many of the senior graduate students had spent 2 or 3 years working themselves to exhaustion for him without ever receiving an opportunity like that. And now she expected them to drop everything and help her? I could already see several senior students' expressions darken instantly. The entire lab fell silent. Not a single person responded. But Chloe seemed completely oblivious to the awkward atmosphere. She frowned at everyone. What does that mean? Are you all excluding me? Or are you jealous because I'm an independent woman who got a journal publication as soon as I started graduate school? You don't want to talk to me because you're jealous, aren't you? The moment she finished speaking, several senior students let out cold, mocking laughs. But 2 male PhD students stood up. We'll help you, Chloe. Their smiles looked honest enough. But I had already caught the subtle glance they exchanged moments earlier. It looked like Chloe was about to learn another painful lesson. From that day forward, she spent most of her time following those 2 around. Outside the lab, she even bragged about having trained 2 obedient lapdogs who did everything she told them to do. Unfortunately for her, even dogs know how to bite their owner. Chloe got a paper accepted in a top-tier journal right after joining the program. You should all learn from her. Not long after, her paper was officially published. Professor Miller praised her in front of the entire lab. Yet from beginning to end, nobody applauded. Nobody congratulated her. Then, 5 days later, Chloe suddenly burst into the laboratory with panic written all over her face. The second she saw those 2 PhD students, she grabbed a metal water bottle and hurled it at them. The heavy bottle slammed directly into one student's head. Blood immediately began pouring down his face. He staggered backward before collapsing onto the floor. Screams erupted throughout the laboratory. But Chloe didn't care about any of that. She grabbed the other student's arm tightly. Come with me. What exactly did you do? With that, she dragged him away. Only afterward did we learn what had happened. The 2 PhD students had deliberately planted falsified data in the paper published under Chloe's name. Because she was lazy, she had never even bothered reading the manuscript after receiving it. The moment she saw pages full of technical jargon, she simply submitted it without checking a single line. Now the journal and university had discovered the problem. She was being accused of academic misconduct. In academia, that accusation was practically a death sentence. Not only would she face disciplinary action from the university, but for years to come she could forget about publishing in any major peer-reviewed journals. Her reputation was completely ruined. From that point forward, her academic career was effectively over. To make matters worse, an official investigation team had already been assigned to examine the case. The reason Chloe dragged the student away was simple. She wanted him to testify on her behalf. But it didn't matter. Whether the issue was fabricated data or having someone else write the paper for her, she would still be guilty of academic fraud. The 2 PhD students had used extreme methods. Still, most of us couldn't help feeling satisfied. One of them was taken away in an ambulance. The other disappeared with Chloe. The rest of us sat in the laboratory, exchanging uneasy looks while waiting for news. No. If they try to make things difficult for Liam, I'll go argue with them myself. That bastard professor exploits us every single day and works us to death. Does he really think we'll never fight back? Exactly. He once forced me to help his son with a science fair project for elementary school students. When the project didn't win, he blamed me for being incompetent. It was ridiculous. When I looked at the competition entries, they were practically written by graduate students and PhDs pretending to be elementary school kids. I won second place in a graduate-level research competition, yet I couldn't even place near the top in that one. What a joke. Liam comes from a poor family. He's always been the most obedient student in the lab, yet he's never received any real opportunities. When Chloe came in bragging about her journal publication the other day, he must have felt terrible. Seriously. Last year Liam wanted to publish his own paper, but the professor kept blocking him. On one hand he worked Liam like a slave. On the other hand he forced him to write papers for him. Liam eventually submitted a manuscript behind his back, and the professor retaliated by delaying his graduation. Why? Why does Chloe get to sleep her way into special treatment and skip straight to the top? I quietly listened to everyone's complaints, remembering every single word. It reminded me of my previous life. My professor had blocked my publications too. And because of a single comment from Chloe, my graduation had been delayed. A thought suddenly formed in my mind. Professors like this deserved to be exposed and punished. The academic gatekeepers who abused their power had gone unchecked for far too long. Maybe being given a second chance at life wasn't just about getting revenge. Maybe it was about doing something that actually mattered. I stood up. Everyone. I think we should write a formal complaint. The lively discussion stopped instantly. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. A few people looked like they wanted to say something, then hesitated. Silence filled the room. Several long minutes passed. Just as I was wondering how to convince everyone, the first person to stand up was the senior student whose experiment Chloe had ruined. I'm in. We should write the complaint together. She stepped forward and stood firmly beside me. Then more voices began to rise. I agree. I'm with you. Count me in. One after another, people throughout the lab spoke up. Seeing everyone's determination, I felt my entire body tremble with emotion. For the first time since entering adulthood, we were truly speaking up for ourselves. Together, we began documenting the professor's years of exploitation, along with the academic misconduct committed by him and several influential figures in the field. The PhD student who had once been forced to help the professor's child compete in an elementary school science competition, passionately declared that those competitions needed serious reform so graduate students and PhDs could no longer secretly participate. The senior student who had been pressured into accepting underpaid contract work through multiple middlemen carefully wrote down every detail of the years she had been worked like a machine. Every sentence was filled with frustration and resentment. We even managed to contact a former student who had once been sexually harassed by the professor. After she resisted, he accused her of seducing him, spread vicious rumors about her, and ultimately forced her out of the program. The incident had left her with severe emotional trauma. But after speaking with us, she finally decided to come forward and fight back. The PhD student whom Chloe had knocked unconscious with the metal bottle had also regained consciousness. Fortunately, security cameras had recorded the entire assault. In my previous life, when I tried to confront Chloe, I had thoroughly investigated her relationship with the professor. Now, exposing everything was only a matter of time. We continued to wait to see how the professor would deal with the two PhD students. I believe you've all heard about what happened. Standing before the entire laboratory, the professor spoke slowly. Miss Chloe Carter accepted assistance from others while preparing her paper. Because she trusted the wrong people, she was set up and is now facing charges of academic misconduct. Consider that punishment enough. He paused briefly before continuing. But those two male students acted with unbelievable malice. Their junior colleague asked for help, and because they were jealous that they hadn't published in a major journal themselves, they deliberately sabotaged her. To use such dirty tricks in an academic environment is disgraceful. Are they trying to intimidate new students? I refuse to tolerate people like that among my students. His voice rose sharply. Then he announced that he would no longer supervise either of the two PhD students. They were free to find another advisor if they wanted. Of course, everyone knew what that really meant. After offending him, no professor in the department would dare take them. In other words, he was quietly destroying their academic futures. Every one of us was furious. And when Chloe returned to the lab, sniffling and pretending to cry, the anger only grew stronger. She even put on a pitiful expression and said, "I really don't understand why society is so cruel. All I wanted was to speak up for women's empowerment. Why would anyone target me like this? They look down on women. This is discrimination against women." Every person in the room clenched their fists. At that point, we all knew a complete fallout was only days away. So why keep holding back? Why not finally fight back? The next moment, years of resentment exploded. We openly confronted the professor and unleashed everything we had endured. Most of it came in the form of furious accusations and angry shouting. The professor had spent years abusing his authority. He had never imagined that his students would one day rise up against him. The incident spread across campus almost immediately. From undergraduates to master's students and PhD candidates, everyone heard about it. Everyone was shocked. Then our collective complaint letter exploded across campus. Students who had suffered under abusive advisors finally began to wake up. One after another, they started sharing their own experiences. Even students who had once had positive relationships with professors. Those who had seen the kinder side of them spoke up in support of holding unethical advisors accountable. The movement grew larger and larger. But it didn't take long for the university administration to notice. They moved quickly to suppress it. Students were forbidden from discussing the matter on public platforms. Anyone who violated the order was threatened with losing scholarships, awards, and academic honors. That warning worried us more than anything else, especially when the attention surrounding the scandal began to fade. It was clear we needed something bigger, something impossible to ignore, a story dramatic enough to force everyone to pay attention. That's when I thought of the professor's wife. By then, we had gathered more than enough evidence of the affair between Professor Miller and Chloe Carter. According to rumors, the professor had come from a poor background. Years ago, he had married the only daughter of one of the city's most influential families. Through that marriage, he had gradually climbed to the position he held today. So what would happen if his wife discovered everything he had been doing behind her back? From what I had heard, she came from privilege, but she was also the kind of woman who never tolerated betrayal. I wrote her a detailed letter. Attached were photographs showing Chloe and the professor meeting privately on numerous occasions, along with evidence proving that he had repeatedly protected and favored her. I sent everything to her email, including the audio recording. They won't accomplish anything. They're just a bunch of students. The university spends more money on crisis management every year than they'll make in their entire lives. Give it some time and this will all blow over. After that, I'll take you overseas and continue supporting your research. Even if your reputation is damaged here, we'll still have opportunities abroad. But you know what you'll have to give me in return for that opportunity, don't you? The professor's voice stopped there. The implication didn't need to be explained. The disgusting sounds that followed made everything perfectly clear. The old man was well past middle age, yet he was still doing things like this. I sent the recording to his wife as well. What would happen next? That depended entirely on the choice she made. After our confrontation with the professor, several of us found ourselves quietly blacklisted by the department. Administrators called us in for a meeting once. After that, they acted as though we no longer existed. They probably believed that students like us could never compete with the university's enormous public relations machine. During those days, Chloe hardly ever returned to the dormitory. One morning while I was still asleep, I heard her come back briefly before rushing out again. About 10 minutes later, loud shouting erupted outside the dorm building. It wasn't me. You've got the wrong person. Not you. Are you seriously telling me the woman in this video isn't you? You're young enough to be his daughter. Why are you running around with an old man? I looked out the window. Standing below was an elegant middle-aged woman. She held up her phone and forced Chloe to look at the photo on the screen. And the young woman in that photo was unmistakably Chloe Carter. Chloe finally lost her patience. Fine. So what if it's me? You may love him, but he doesn't love you. Ma'am, why don't you just leave the marriage yourself? All I did was fall in love with an older man. What's wrong with that? Does love have an age limit now? Honestly, there is no first or second place in love. The person who isn't loved is the real third wheel. Marriage is nothing more than a legal and financial contract. This is the modern era. Those outdated ideas should have disappeared long ago. We should be living in an age of free love. The moment she finished speaking, she raised her hand and slapped the woman across the face. The woman froze. I froze. Even the bystanders froze. People had seen wives slap mistresses before. But a mistress slapping the wife? That was a first. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. Videos of the incident spread online almost immediately. With a little push from our side, the story shot straight to the trending charts. This time, Professor Miller had nowhere left to hide. At that exact moment, the former student who had once accused him of harassment spoke out online again. This time, the university's public relations team couldn't bury the story. People were shocked to discover that the professor's misconduct with students wasn't an isolated incident. One after another, former female students from previous years came forward with their own accounts. Stories involving power, sex, and abuse always attract attention. The scandal exploded once again. And just as public interest reached its peak, the collective complaint letter we had originally circulated on campus was released publicly. This time it didn't remain within university walls. It spread across social media at a speed no one could stop. Countless students were moved by what they read. They began supporting us while sharing their own experiences with unreasonable, abusive advisors. As the movement continued growing, someone even created a public online document called Reclaiming Integrity in Academia. At that point, the professor could no longer hide behind Chloe. His entire history was dragged into the spotlight. People began digging through everything. Even conferences he had organized years earlier were re-examined. It was soon discovered that he had publicly made misogynistic remarks during academic lectures for years. He had even joked about sensitive gender-related topics to entertain audiences. The worst part was that he had genuinely thought he was funny. It was laughable. Back then, plenty of senior students warned people not to take his classes. Half the department hated him. Later he stopped making those comments in public. Everyone thought he'd changed. Turns out he just moved from doing it openly to doing it behind closed doors. The online document spread rapidly across universities nationwide. More than 3,000 professors and advisors were eventually named. People started calling it the academic earthquake. At last, higher authorities could no longer ignore what was happening. As for the PhD student whom Professor Miller had abandoned, a young assistant professor with a strong sense of justice stepped forward and agreed to become his new advisor. But this time, the person summoned for questioning was Chloe Hayes. The university initially placed Professor Miller on administrative leave pending investigation. However, it was obvious that such a punishment could not satisfy the public, especially when it became clear that higher authorities had also taken notice of the case. After days of closed-door meetings, no one knew exactly what had been discussed. All anyone knew was that the final decision was eventually announced. Chloe Hayes was expelled from the university. Professor Miller, along with the entire academic network connected to him, was completely dismantled. At the same time, he was facing formal allegations of sexual harassment. As for how many years he would ultimately be sentenced to, that was a matter for the future. Meanwhile, the online database that symbolized what people now call the academic earthquake continued to spread. More and more names were added every day. Even though our fight had come to an end, even though the authorities could never possibly investigate every single name on that list, no one could deny that we had started something new. And the growing movement behind that list was proof of everything we had fought for. After everything was over, Liam and I were reassigned to the research group of a young assistant professor. He was strict and demanding, the kind of scholar who genuinely wanted to accomplish something meaningful. Under his guidance, I gradually published several papers of my own. As for Chloe Hayes, after being expelled, she was practically finished in academia. She tried applying for numerous jobs, but her face and her infamous statements were recognized by almost everyone. Very few reputable companies were willing to hire her. Yet she looked down on smaller employers. She still believed she was an exceptional, independent woman. And in her mind, an independent woman shouldn't work for ordinary companies. She deserved a refined and perfect life. So instead she decided to get married. Ironically, finding a husband proved even harder than finding a job. After all, she had once been the other woman. What was strange was that Chloe was extremely picky when searching for work. But when it came to finding a man, her standards suddenly became much lower. In the end, she married a short, overweight man with a bad temper. One evening during a gathering with members of our research group, I happened to pass by them on the street. I saw him shouting at her, then shoving her violently while hurling insults. But I simply turned away and left. The consequences of someone else's choices were not mine to interfere with. I returned to the restaurant. Looking at my friends and colleagues laughing together around the table, I couldn't help but smile. Then I quickened my pace and walked toward them. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. See you again in the next story.